Okay, so I've got the pillar drill table all nicely arrised and is now ready to be attached to the oak battens below. And the way I plan on doing this is with screws. Now, obviously I can't get access to the battens from underneath to screw it into the top. So I'm going to do it from above, but I don't want those screw holes to be visible. So I am going to get this T-track. I'm going to inlay that within the top. And then with these screw holes, I'll screw all the way through the top and into the batten below. So to begin with, I just need to get this central on the pillar drill table, mark the location of the battens, and we'll get cutting those grooves to fit the T-track. Okay, so after a quick bit of measuring, I've got a 75mm overhang, and then it takes a further 20mm to get to the center of the batten below. So I need to mark a line 95mm in from the edge on either side, and then that should be, once I draw it parallel with the edge, which actually I could do with a marking gauge. There we go. Now, as this T-track is dovetailed in its section, I'm obviously going to be using a dovetail cutter for this, but it's always best to hog out the majority of that material with a more substantial cutter to begin with. So I've got this straight cutter here, which is going to hog out the center, and then I'll use the dovetail cutter afterwards to refine the actual angles within there. So this one I'm going to set to be ever so slightly shy of the top of the T-track. So it looks like I need to move that down a tiny bit. Should do it. Yep, there we go. That's fine. So then let's just close this fence up. What I can then do is set the fence to be a 95mm offset from the cutter to the center of the cutter, like that. Should do it. Yeah, 95mm. And then if I run both sides of that table up against the fence going over this cutter, should mean that it's directly on that marking gauge line. Should. Lovely. And what I think I might do here actually is lower this cutter and take this hogging out pass in 2 cuts rather than do the entire thing in 1 hit, because it's going to put less stress on the cutter. If I do it in 2 passes, I'll get a cleaner cut, I'll get more control. Yeah, I'll take off half of it and then take it to the depth that I've currently got here, and then we'll cut the dovetail shape into it. So I've got the dovetail bit installed now, and that is just taken off the final millimetre in terms of depth. And once I've done, so I'm going to do 1 pass like that. Once I've done that, that is where I'm going to start offsetting the fence to the left to cut one side of the slot. And then once I've done the left-hand side on both sides of this table, I will then offset it to the right and just keep taking little nibbles at a time until that T-slot is able to slide into the groove. Right, so now I'm going to get this central on the table, pop the 2 T-tracks in, pilot them and everything like that. And then before screwing it, I'm actually going to put a bit of glue on the battens below as well, so that they will be screwed and glued in place for extra security and longevity. Right, it's all screwed in place. So in theory, when I take this table off, it should bring the 2 side battens with it. Let's have a look, shall we? Yeah, quality. So then that should just easily drop back in, nice and secure. Definitely needs that front batten because actually there is about a millimetre movement front to back, so I'll get that front batten glued in. Yeah, looks pretty good. I like it. All right, so after a bit of back and forth, we've got everything glued down. So the clamps are pulling the tabletop into the battens below, as well as the screws. So it should be pretty secure. The only one I'm worried about is the one at the front, but to be honest, it doesn't matter if it's not completely pulled tight, as long as it isn't able to move front to back. That's the main thing. That's the main thing we're looking for here. So while this is drying, we can turn our attention to the fence, which is all secure now. This fence has this thing mounted on top, which will accept, oh, I did that wrong, that way, which will accept the hold down clamps and like the stops and everything like that. And then on the back of that, we're gonna have these sliding things in the T-track. These will fit into a hole in the back of this track, which will accept a tightening knob thingy. Now, if I make that a singular hole in the back of the fence, what's going to happen as this slightly skews, or if I do a small adjustment from one side, that hole isn't going to allow it to move properly. So what I need to do is actually create a elongated groove in here, which is the same width as the thread on one of these T-slots. So to do this, I've got a router bit in the router table that is the same diameter as the thread on this. And what I'm going to be doing is getting the fence and dropping it onto the router bit. Now, before I do this, what's worth saying is I'm not advising you to do it in the way that I have just stated. It is possible to drop onto router bits. You definitely shouldn't do it at this depth, but you can drop onto them, but there is potential for it to catch and for this thing to go flying or your fingers to get dragged the wrong way. So what I'm going to do with this is actually drill a hole through the center of where I want those grooves to be. And that will be slightly wider than this thread. I think this is an M6, so I'll make it M8. It can be any diameter between the width of this and the maximum, the diameter of this. So that's about, I don't know, 15 mil. So I can drill a hole anywhere between 6 and 15 mil, and this will still clamp down because that will still have area, or that will still have an area to push down onto. So I'm going to drill a hole, probably about 8 to 10 millimeters, and then with that hole, I'll be able to pop this through that hole and move it side to side without any risk of it catching while I'm lowering it onto the router bit. So instead of locating this groove halfway in the back of this fence, what I'm going to do is edge it slightly towards the back so that I've got more clearance with using this knob, and also the fence over the top won't get in the way of it either. So I think around there should do. And what's the offset of that going to be? Let's see, so call it 23 millimeters from the edge, I reckon. So I'll set a gauge to that. And then with those holes that I'm going to drill them slightly in of the two T-tracks either side. That way, I mean, it will still clamp with that hole there, as I explained earlier, but there is potential for it to move front and back still if I didn't tighten it tight enough. So if I was to do it directly over the T-track where this fence is going to be locked most of the time, then there is potential for it to move still. Whereas if I drill the hole here, no matter which way I angle this fence, it's unlikely that it's ever going to be able to get into the whole area there. Whereas if I make it outside of the groove, if I was to say, let's skew this all the way around this way, it can get it there and it could possibly get it here as well. Whereas it obviously can't get in between those two T-tracks. I'm just going to do it. I think it'll make more sense that way. Okay, so I've got two options here. I could either turn the router on and carefully try and lower it through that hole while it's spinning and then get it in place, or I can just make sure that the router is not touching any of these walls, start it up and then begin cutting. Either of them will work, but I feel like this method where I start like this will be less risky. I've just got to make sure that it's definitely not touching any of the oak before I turn it on, because while it's starting up, it's more likely to catch and throw this bit of material. With this as well, when I start with this one, I'm gonna start with it like that, and then I'm gonna be moving it this way to elongate the groove in this direction. Whereas on this one, I need to elongate it that way, which means that when I lower this onto the bit and I start pulling it towards me, the way this is spinning, it's going to be cutting on this face, which means that as it's spinning round like this, it's going to be wanting to pull this away from the fence. So when you're using router tables, I'm going to do a video dedicated on this in the future, but just a quick tip for you. With router tables, you always want to be feeding from right to left. I'm going to say that's the case with 99% of situations, because I'm sure there is exceptions to this, but most of the time, right to left, never go left to right, because it's more likely to catch and you're doing climb cuts and all that sort of stuff. So what I'm going to do instead is, with this one, we'll start like that. I can push it forward and then that will be working from right to left. Whereas with this one, I'm going to have to flip the fence around, readjust the offset, and then reference off the back instead and push it that way. So then I'm still elongating the groove in the direction that I want, but I'm also working from right to left. And then the other thing I'm going to do for myself here is put a little mark on the fence, so that when I've lowered this onto the fence, or when I've loaded it onto the cutter, sorry, as I push it forward, I can see when I've hit that mark on the fence and I've got the desired groove length. The reason I'm doing this is because with this cutter, as before, I don't want to do it in one hit. I want to do the bottom half to start with, then raise it up and finish off the cut afterwards, so that there's less stress on the cutter. So with that only taking out half the material, effectively the groove that I'm cutting is blind, because it's going to be on the other side of here. So let's mark this out. I think it's going to be around 60 millimeters long. Just going to put it somewhere there. This doesn't need to be completely accurate. In fact, I could just do that. There we go, that'll work. And if I line that mark up with the cutter, which looks to be around there, that is where I want to stop my material while it's being pushed. That should give me the desired length. Right, let's have a go, shall we? Cool, okay. Smelled a bit burny for some reason, but yeah, we'll take it. Should be right. Okay, next pass. We get a nice old push stick for this one, I think. Cool, worked a treat. So same again for the other side, but I just need to readjust the offset of the fence, but I can still use the same mark that I've drawn on there, because it's traveling in the same direction and all that fun. So, aluminium extrusion thing is attached to the fence. It's looking good. The table, battens are glued on and all secure, sitting nicely into the pillar drill bed. Now, the last thing to do is create the recess thing that's going to accept the sacrificial plates that I'm going to be putting in this. So every time it gets drilled and damaged, I can just take it out and replace it with a new one. So to do that, I've created this, a super square window. Don't know what made it super, but I've made a little square window in a bit of MDF, and that is going to go on top of here, going to route a square out, and then within that, I'm going to be drilling a hole saw all the way through, which will make it easier for me to use the spindle sander on this drill press table. So firstly, I'm going to find the midpoint of this and create some crosshairs. And then what I can do with some crosshairs drawn on the window around the outside, I can line that up with the crosshairs below, and then I know that it's perfectly central on the pillar drill table. But before I do that, like if I was to just go ahead and route this out with a guide bush and a router, I would end up removing the crosshairs in the middle. Thus, I wouldn't know where to drill with the hole saw. So I need to do this bit first, going all the way through, and then once I've done that, I'll have the crosshairs around the outside still. Pop this on there, route the outside, and we'll see what it looks like. Alright, so I've installed a tiny little guide bush, and I've decided to break out the spiral cutter router bit. I've never used one of these before. It just looks so brutal. So the window's firmly clamped down. This will go on here, and I'll just go around the outside and try and hog out as much material in the middle as possible without... actually, it's going to be quite difficult to tip this, I think. Might not be too bad. Not going to tempt fate, but there we go. So I'll set the depth stop, so zero this onto the material, and then what I can do is loosen off this, lift that up, pop a spacer between there, and that spacer is 15 millimeters and will be the thickness of the plate, or the sacrificial plate. And then the distance between there and there is how far the router will travel further before stopping. So that should cut. Well, that should be cutting at the exact depth of this now. And as it's so enclosed, you're not going to see a lot of the action of this. I mean, I can't see a lot of the action either. It's just going to be a lot of noise. And yeah, hopefully when I take the router away, I've got what I intended. Let's just do it. Apologies, Rob. The camera stopped filming just as I started finishing, so have fun editing that one. there we go. There is the pillar drill table complete. This is something that I've had on my mind for a very, very long time, because without one of these, pillar drills are just a nightmare to use, to be honest. Like now I've got something that I can have a specific offset to the drill. I've got something where I can do the side offset as well, and it's just, apart from anything, it's also a nice point to brace against when you're drilling stuff. So rather than expend energy pushing stuff down, you just lean it into the fence and you get a lot more support from it. So there aren't plans available for this, but the tracks and all the hardware and stuff are available from AXMINSTER. This is the UJK brand. However, like, it's a generic track, you can get it elsewhere. Yeah, not much else to say other than that, to be honest. So if you liked the video, don't forget to press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Patreon. There is a link to that in the description. I'll be very thankful for that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.